we go. So you do have the option of taking the final. Now, here's my promise to you. I will only replace an exam grade with a final grade if it is better. So your grade can only get better if you take the final. Otherwise, you will have the grade that you end up with next Friday. So I'm working on getting the grade book up to date. It should be pretty much up to date by Friday. So that'll give you a little bit of time to make that decision. And I am going to grade these exams super fast so that you have all the information that you need to make that decision. Okay? So your grade taking the final will only help you. I will not let it hurt you. Okay? Any other questions? Any other questions here? Okay. So the last time that we were here, we were talking about attitudes and behavior. And so one of the things that we kind of talked about before we left was the fact that our attitudes can be explicit and implicit. Oh, and if you weren't here, here's some old pictures. So this is from like maybe 5 years ago with Smedley as a puppy. He still looks exactly the same. And then me and Dr. Roy painting. All right, so our attitudes can be explicit or implicit, and I did want to show this to you. So if you are inclined, if you go to implicit.harvard.edu, you can actually look at different types of social attitudes. And so if you click through, there are a couple of different tests for implicit biases. So there are ones for religion, gender and career, Arab and Muslim, age, disability, gender associated with science, skin tone, weight, sexuality, whether you're Native, Asian, the original race IAT, which was specifically looking at Black versus white, presidents, and people who are transgender. So you can see a lot of different biases that you might potentially have. So to kind of give you an example of how this works, so the original IAT that was developed by Brian Nosek, what they basically did was it was basically a reaction time test. So you had two different things that you had to do. You had to categorize good words versus bad words. So if this is a positive word, you press this key. If it's a negative word, you press this key. And then additionally, you would get either black faces or white faces. So is this a black face? Press this key. If it's a white face, press this other key. And then what they did after they kind of got both of those are kind of baseline conditions. What they did is they would say, okay, if you see either a white face or a positive word, press this key. If you see a black face or a negative word, press this key. And then they'd switch it. So if you see a black face and a positive word, press this key. If you see a white face and a negative word, press this key. And so what they're trying to look at is how fast you are pairing certain faces with either positive or negative words. And we do actually find that for many people, there is a subtle reaction time difference. Now, some of you may ask yourself, is this a measure of implicit bias? And that's really an important question to answer. There has been a lot of debate since these IATs came out. They're not always very reliable. Some people have potentially questioned their validity. And additionally, it's really easy to consciously control your responses. At that point, it is no longer an implicit measure. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go ahead and try some of those measures and see what you think about them. I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts. Okay, so as we kind of mentioned, attitudes are not perfect predictors of behavior. So what happens when your attitudes and your behavior conflict with each other? So for example, let's say that I think it's really important to help people in need. And then I go to Kansas City to go shopping and I run into a panhandler asking me for money and I choose not to give. Now, in this particular case, I have an attitude that it's important to help the people who are needy. But I just behaved in a way that shows that that's not always the case. I did not help the needy in this case. So my attitudes are conflicting with my actions. What happens in these cases is what Leon Festinger referred to as something called cognitive dissonance. When your attitudes do not fit with your behavior, this creates a state of tension. And here's what's really interesting. So you would think that if your attitudes and your behavior are conflicting, so if I think it's important to help people in need, and I choose not to help these people, here's what should happen, but here's what I will tell you what often happens instead. So what should happen is you go, okay, my attitudes are not perfect predictors of my behavior. I am clearly not a perfect person. I am a hypocrite. I make mistakes. That's what should happen. Like, let's be very clear. A lot of us think it's important to help people, and sometimes we don't always do that because sometimes we think our needs take precedence. You doing okay, Tessa? Yeah. Okay, that hot tea looks like that would be really, really good. So I hope you're feeling okay. Thank you. You're welcome. But here's what often happens instead. If our behavior conflicts with our attitudes, we are often going to change our attitude instead of either changing our behavior or admitting that we are imperfect people. So we could change our behavior and help needy people. We could change the idea of ourselves and say, well, maybe I'm an imperfect person, but I want to do better. But what we'll often do is we'll change our attitudes. So if I choose not to give to a panhandler on the street and I think it's important to help the needy, I'm going to change my attitude. And I might say something to myself like, well, I'm only going to give them money if they deserve it, or if I believe they deserve it. So that gives me a little out so that I can keep my attitude, so to speak, but I can also explain away my behavior. So we're often going to change our attitudes. So I'm going to give you a silly example. I think you're going to like this. I want you to imagine that you came to take part in one of my experiments. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. My experiments are pretty boring, but I want you to imagine that you come in and I'm pretty happy and I'm like, oh, hey, Danny, it's really nice to see you today. For this experiment, I want you to eat a grasshopper. Yay. So your original attitude, Danny, would you say you think eating grasshoppers is disgusting?
I did it for extra credit once.
Seriously? Okay, you're a bad example then. Okay, is there anybody here who thinks that eating grasshoppers is disgusting? Okay, Tessa, I'm picking on you then. So you believe this, but I'm really nice, or at least I try to be. And so I'm like, Tessa, hey, how's it going? Would you like to eat a grasshopper? And because you're taking part in the experiment, you'll do it. And here's the thing, if I'm nice, you don't actually have a conflict with your attitude because you can be like, well, I still don't like eating grasshoppers, but I thought it was really important to help Dr. G out, right? So there's no conflict there because you can basically explain away your behavior by saying, oh, I was just helping so-and-so out. So your attitude doesn't change. But imagine that instead of me, you get an experimenter who's really rude and not very nice to you, and you eat the grasshopper anyway. You don't have a way to explain away your behavior now. You can't be like, I was helping them out. They were rude to you. So in this case, this person was a jerk. You ate the grasshopper anyway. So now you have cognitive dissonance. And so you're going to change your attitude and go, well, it wasn't that bad. Does everybody kind of get this? We'll go through a few more examples. I think you're going to enjoy this. So, I do want to talk about another experiment. I thought I had slides on this, but I do not. So the original study that Festinger did looked at people who were in a really boring experiment, like more boring than my usual experiments where you have to watch colored shapes. No, I'm not kidding. The biggest risk in my studies is that you'll become bored. It's a very basic, boring level task. But let's say that you take part in a boring experiment. And here's what's going to happen. I choose to pay you money. And I want you to tell the person in the next experiment that's taking part in the experiment that it was a lot of fun. So you have to lie. So in some conditions, some of the participants weren't paid at all. And so they didn't have an incentive to lie. And so guess what? Very few of them did lie. And most of them continued to think that the experiment was boring. Another group got paid $20 and they lied very easily. But did they still think the experiment was boring? Yes. Here's why. You can say, well, I was just doing it to get $20. And yeah, $20 doesn't go as far as it used to, but y'all, that's lunch at Panera and maybe dinner at Panera. That's maybe 2 meals. That's a big deal. So that doesn't change your attitude because you have something you can fall back on and go, oh yeah, I was just lying for $20. Other people got paid $1 and they lied. Now, they lied, but $1 is not sufficient enough money to explain away why they lied. So guess what happens? Most of them started to believe that the experiment wasn't that bad. So if you don't have an excuse to fall back on as to why your attitudes and behavior conflicted, you're going to be more likely to get cognitive dissonance. So Leon Festinger is really the primary person that came up with this. He also looked at this in real life instances. So I'm going to try not to get too far down the rabbit hole here. Sometimes this will happen when people believe in conspiracy theories that make very specific predictions that do not come true. What you're often going to find is that instead of abandoning beliefs, people will double down on their beliefs and they'll shift the goalposts. So, for example, back in the 1950s, Festinger and a few of his associates actually infiltrated a doomsday cult that believed that the end of the world was coming. And there was a very specific prediction that it would happen at Christmas. And basically, well, obviously the world didn't end because, well, it's 2022 and we're all here. So clearly the world didn't end. So what are these people going to do with these predictions that the end of the world would come and then it didn't? It's really scary to abandon beliefs that you put a lot of your personal identity into. So guess what most of these people did? They doubled down on their beliefs and said, oh, we read the prophecy wrong. It's actually supposed to happen 2 years from now. So if you're interested in learning more about this study, there's an article in The Atlantic that came out about 8 years ago called "The Christmas the Aliens Didn't Come." It's a really good article. If you want to see instances of cognitive dissonance in action in everyday life, this is a very good one. And potentially you can apply it to certain things that have happened over the past couple of years. That's all I'm going to say. All right. Now, some other types of dissonance happen as well. So one example of this is what is referred to as postdecisional dissonance. So how many of you applied to multiple colleges besides Cotty? So now here's my question to anybody that applied to multiple colleges. Do you think you would be happier there or happier here? Like, now I'm going to be completely honest with you. Most of you probably could have been pretty happy at a variety of different places, just like many people do. However, when we make a choice, especially when we have other options that are equally good that you like, What we're often going to do is engage in post-decisional dissonance. We don't want to feel like we made the wrong choice. So what you choose will often be framed very positively, and what you did not choose will be framed very negatively. So for example, when I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go to for grad school, I had two different options. I had the University of Missouri, where I would be working with somebody I liked, but not with much money, or I could work at the University of South Florida, a few miles, like maybe 30 miles away from my hometown, but I had 5 years of full funding due to a presidential fellowship. Additionally, there was nobody there that I really wanted to work with. So different options with a variety of different consequences depending on what I chose. I ended up picking the University of Missouri, and I ultimately believe it was a really good fit for me. Of course, the question becomes, is that because it really was a good fit for me, or is that my post-decisional dissonance kicking in? It's probably a combination of both. But when we make a choice and we have many options available, it's really hard to think about, well, maybe I picked wrong, or maybe I could have been happy with this other option. That creates a lot of tension, so we engage in post-decisional dissonance. Okay, so I already told you all this, but this is why cognitive dissonance happens. If we don't have something to blame our behavior on, we are going to get dissonance. So I already kind of told you this. Let's imagine that I make you participate in a really boring study, and then I offer you $1 or $20 to lie and tell the next person that it was fun. And most people are going to lie. Now, as I kind of brought up, most people that lied for $1 changed their attitude and said, well, the study wasn't as bad as I thought. Other people that got $20, their attitudes didn't change because $20 is sufficient money to basically justify lying about something. While you're writing this down, a couple of quick announcements for you. Instrumental music concert is on Sunday. You should come. What?
Oh, I was not expecting that to be brought up.
Oh, well, normally I would be in it. But we already have a tuba player, so I am not there.
Yeah, we're bringing in the high schoolers from Nevada.
Mhm.
Do you know what time it is?
Not off the top of my head. Oh, thank you, Tori.
5 o'clock, 3 o'clock? Okay,
Thank you, Tori.
thank you.
Y'all actually have to be there earlier if you're in the band. 2:30 concert, black. That is the one thing I won't miss. I don't like wearing black. It makes me look like I'm dead.
Or call times 2:15 for this time.
Wow. Oof.
I think it's because we're gonna do a little bit.
That's a good idea. Okay, so here are the results from the boring study by Festinger and Carl Smith. People that did not lie did not enjoy the task. People that got paid $20 to lie enjoyed it a little more, not because they actually believed the task was entertaining, but you'd be pretty happy too if you got $20. But the group that enjoyed the task the most were the people that got $1 to lie. $1 is not enough money to justify lying. As a result, you are going to have to change your attitude. So apparently, if you want somebody to not that I would ever do this, but if I wanted y'all to give me good evaluations on my class, apparently what I should do is like give you $1 and apparently, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, you wouldn't even have to like make it a bribe. You could just give us all $1.
It's not okay, so I'm not bribing. I want you to be honest. However, I will say that if you complete your I am interested in honesty, not lying. And what I am about to say is not a bribe, but
That's suspicious.
and if 75% of the class completes their evaluations, I will give y'all 5 points extra credit.
Guys,
If
please.
75% or more complete their evaluations, I will give you extra credit. So if you've and here's the thing, it's not a bribe. I want you to be honest. It's about getting it completed because the more people that rate it, the more valid the data is. And I'll bring snacks next week, but that's for your exam. Okay. But I was going to do that anyway. Okay, so here's the original study by Festinger and Carl Smith. So your belief is I'm not cheap and I don't lie easily. So if you do something that is inconsistent, did boring task and lied for $1, you're going to get a high dissonance amount. On the other hand, if you're not cheap, $20, like, let's be clear, even for me, $20 is a lot. Like if $20 falls out of my pocket and I lose it, I'm going to be really sad. This is low dissonance. So you can say, oh yeah, I just lied for the money. Like that's enough money to get me to lie. One group, the $1 group, liked the study more, and that's because $1 is not much justification for choosing to lie. Yes.
Do we know at what dollar amount it switches from?
I think it's going to be different for everybody. What would be your dollar amount? Mine would probably be 10.
I'll say yeah.
10's enough for a dinner.
I've got a lot for $1. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to know. Huh? I miss you all so much. Y'all crack me up. Okay. But here's something kind of interesting. So our actions can actually change our attitudes. As we talked about last time with the Robbers Cave study, when you have to cooperate with somebody, you tend to like them a little more. Now, another thing that we can kind of do is do what is called the foot in the door phenomenon. Now, the foot in the door phenomenon can be used for a variety of different means. The idea is that we get big attitude change through small incremental steps. So if you can believe it, the foot in the door phenomenon has actually been used to brainwash people. And it was actually used on prisoners of war, I believe, during the Korean War. And so what you would find with a lot of these people is that first, they would get them to do things that didn't involve a lot of personal commitment. So you've got these prisoners of war, and basically you're just having them copy materials. And here's the thing, you don't have to believe in that information. It's just copying, right? You don't have to believe that. Here's the catch though. Once you say yes to one thing, it's going to be easier to say yes to a lot of other things. And each of those things is going to involve an increasing level of commitment. So in another instance, people did public confessions where they basically confessed all the wrong they'd done in a group of other people. They had to start listing the flaws of things like capitalism and the pros of things like communism. And eventually, each of these steps took greater and greater commitment and greater belief. And all of a sudden, you've done all of these different things. And you started by not believing, but at this point, by gradually increasing the commitment, many of these prisoners of war actually renounced their citizenship and said that they were happy where they were staying. And that's how you create attitude change. Now, most of us are probably not going to be involved in those instances. However, The foot in the door phenomenon often begins with very small steps and levels of commitment. How many of you have been to those mall kiosks? You know the ones. Can I ask you a question? And usually my response is, you just did, and walk away. Because here's the thing. Answering them or turning to them or looking at them doesn't really involve a lot of commitment. But once you're there, and then they start touching your hand, and then they start putting like scrubs and stuff like that on your hand, that's an increasing level of commitment. By the time you're done, you have spent a lot of money on stuff that you could have gotten somewhere else for cheaper because you were being nice and you didn't want to say no, even as the level of involvement and commitment increased. That first yes opens the door to further yeses. So I can get a full commitment from you by just putting my foot in the door and then increasing the level of commitment in smaller incremental steps. Does that kind of make sense? Now, the roles that we play also affect our attitudes. Now, I told you I would not be talking much about the Stanford prison study, and I'm still not, because there is so much scientifically that's wrong with it from an ethical perspective and from a basic research level perspective. There's a lot of confirmation bias in this study. You've got the principal investigator taking part in the study and having a very clear conflict of interest. You're having people say, I want you to play it like this person. At that point, it's not really an experiment, and it's much, much more of a production. But what I will say with the Stanford prison study is that oftentimes when we are in situations where we have a certain role to play, that can affect our attitudes. So of particular note in the Stanford prison study, these participants were brought into a fake prison at Stanford University. Some were asked to act as guards and some were asked to act as prisoners. This was randomly assigned. It was a coin flip shot. So you had just as much chance of being a prisoner as you did a guard. What's really interesting is that especially for people who were guards, they really started to dehumanize the prisoners in those instances. Even though they could have very easily been in the situation where they were prisoners, there very much became, well, I'm treating you this way. It must be because you deserved it. So once again, kind of diving into that just world idea. And what's really interesting about this is that despite the fact that the Stanford prison study is not a good study, we see similar dehumanization of people when we have those kind of roles. As you can see from the Abu Ghraib prison scandal, where a bunch of military police in Iraq dehumanized Iraqi prisoners in these very terrible ways, simply because they were in charge of them. So now we're going to talk about how we influence each other. So we talked about attribution, we've talked about attitudes, and now we're going to talk about the influences that you and I have on other people and how other people influence us. So I know, I didn't make this joke. It's a very okay boomer joke, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. So banking on the youth market, be like tattoo and piercing, be like all your friends and express your individuality. Yeah, that's a boomer joke, I think. Yeah. It really is. But social influence does play a role. And I think there is a way to be an individual, but the truth of the matter is that we do influence each other. Outside influences do actually mold us in a lot of ways. Like we do have social norms in society. It's why it's why pretty much all of you came to class today wearing pants. Like we have social norms in place. Also, it's really cold. Like if you showed up to class in your bathing suit, I'd be like, wow, you're really brave. Not for any other reason than it is freezing out there. And I'm an old person that wonders why more of you aren't wearing jackets outside. Like, you're gonna catch your death of cold. I'm turning into my mother. No, one time last year, she's like, you're going out with wet hair, you're gonna get a cold. I'm like, that's not how viruses work, Mom. They don't just suddenly infect you because your hair is wet. They just make you really uncomfortable. Okay, so one of the things that's kind of interesting that I've noticed is that we are often very programmed to imitate and mirror other people. So I see this sometimes when I'm at meetings where I'm sitting around a table with people and I will start to take a drink and then suddenly other people will start to take a drink around the same time. Or I'll put my head in this hand and suddenly I will see other people do it too. Or other people will be doing it first and then I realize, oh shoot, I'm doing that too. How many of you have had that kind of experience before? This is what is referred to as the chameleon effect. We like to mirror people. Oftentimes when we see somebody doing something, we tend to imitate it too. So in a pretty famous experiment, participants had to basically sit with an actor that was part of the experiment. And the actor either would rub their face or shake their foot. And what the researchers found is that participants were more likely to rub their face when the actor did, and they were more likely to shake their foot when the actor did. So we see this in a lot of ways. Contagious yawning is another one of those ways. Like my partner and I, when we're going to bed, we'll just set each other off. I'm like, stop it. Sometimes our dog can get us to do it. Like Smedley will just be like, oh. That's the noise he makes when he yawns. You probably haven't seen us out very much because it's very cold and it gets dark early. But if you see the Smedley, give him a pet before you go. He might be a little wired because he's cold and he only has one coat. He is not like dogs with double coats. He is a single coated dog. So he is very cold all the time.
Get him a little jacket.
Oh, we have one. It took him 2 years to wear it before he actually is 2. He has a cute little puffy vest that he wears when it rains. And then he has like a little suede jacket with shearling. Yeah. We don't try to dress him in clothes though, because he'd eat it all. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about conformity and obedience. So we're going to talk about the continuum between conformity, compliance, and obedience. So conformity can be thought of as adjusting your behavior and your thinking to fit with a group standard. So I may have brought this up a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last month, when I mentioned that when I was a kid, all the other girls in my Girl Scout troop wanted to watch The Little Mermaid. And I was tired of The Little Mermaid. But when it came time for me to say what I wanted, guess what I said? The Little Mermaid, because I did not want to stand out. Now, that's conformity. Obedience is basically behaving a certain way because somebody in authority tells you to.
Is it like a spectrum?
It can be thought of a spectrum. So kind of in the middle of the spectrum is basically compliance, which is doing something because somebody else asks you to, though they don't necessarily have to be an authority. So conformity is basically just fitting in with other people. Compliance is doing favors for other people, and obedience is basically being ordered to do something. So it's kind of a continuum in terms of the power differential. Like conformity, you're dealing with peers. Compliance, you're dealing with a mix of peers and authority figures. Obedience, you are specifically dealing with authority figures. I would also say, because I said so does not work as a good obedience tactic. I always hated that as a kid. Like, why? Because I said so. I'm like, that's not a good reason, though. Like, that's just a power tactic. Of course, no parent wants to hear that. Parents cannot be reasoned or argued with. I have learned that the hard way. Huh?
In some cases.
Huh?
Some cases, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not when you're not.
Yeah, I know.
And you can't form arguments. It depends on the parent.
It also depends on the child and how smart they think they are. I thought I was like the smartest thing. I thought I was smarter than both of my parents.
My argument, and then it was like, okay, I'll just learn from you how to make a convincing argument. By the age of 10, I made a convincing argument and was able to get a souvenir every time we went to Silver City.
Wow.
My parents used to tell me that they cannot be reasoned or argued with to shut down arguments. They were just like, no.
Now,
Yeah, no, my parents treated me like an adult from when I could actually form sentences.
well, and your parents probably taught you a lot about ways to behave in public and stuff like that. And let's be very clear. It is important to be an individual, but we conform. And that doesn't necessarily mean a sign of weakness. You live in a society with other people, and you've got to do things for the common good to get along with each other. So sometimes we have to conform. Just think about some of our different social norms. So I already brought up an example, wear pants. That is a norm. Norms are either explicit rules or implicit rules about how we are expected to behave. So some examples are, don't stand too close to other people. Some of y'all need to learn that in the lunch line. Some of you stand way too close to me, although it's in my defense, I've got a really big personal bubble and it's much bigger than my arms. I'm just like, no, if you're like, when we were told to stay 6 feet away from people, I was like, that's still too close. My personal bubble is huge. Wait your turn is another one. Can anybody think of other social norms that we have to deal with? Yeah, Luca. How many of you were told that too? Mm-hmm. Other people, other norms. Yeah.
Don't talk when someone else is talking.
Yeah, that's a hard one for me. Other norms.
Volume, like volume of your voice.
Okay. Don't be too loud.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your voice, bingo.
Uh-huh.
This is an odd one, but it's something that's happening in my family. One of gender reveals for babies.
Oh. Maybe we don't set places on fire during our gender reveal parties.
We're generally pressured into having them because that's normal.
Oh, gotcha.
So
Mm-hmm.
I have cousins who are having babies, and that's what's going on with them.
Story? Okay. Okay. Oh, conflict avoidance. Yes. Mm-hmm. And you've probably seen other ones like, and let's be very clear, the pull to conform can be really strong. How many of you have been to I'm not saying this happens all the time, but how many of you have been to like a performance or an instance where all of a sudden at the end of the show, everybody's doing a standing ovation? And then you're like, well, I thought it was good, but maybe not standing ovation good. But then everybody's standing up and you're like, uh-oh, what do I do? What do I do? Okay. This happens to me at hockey games sometimes. where they're like, we're going to give a standing ovation. I'm like, but is this standing ovation worthy? I'm like, okay. You can kind of see that in play in a variety of different instances. So the question becomes, will you follow other people even if you don't agree with them? And this kind of goes back to the idea that you and I have a need to belong, and we don't want to feel like we're sticking out, because sticking out can sometimes mark us as being different, which can mark us as being ostracized. You and I want to belong, and our need to conform is very powerful. So probably one of the landmark studies that looked at social psychology in particular and conformity was the work of Solomon Asch. So what Solomon Asch basically did was he put a bunch of participants in a group, and they're all sitting in a circle, and they have to look at these lines and compare them to some other lines. So here is a line, and they're told which one matches this line. What's the correct answer here? It's clearly 2. Now, in a control condition, people were basically sitting on their own, and they had to say which one matched. And in this particular instance, there's not a lot of pressure to conform. You're by yourself. Nobody else is pressuring you to give a different answer. However, in a conform condition, you were sitting with a group of people, and you had to mark your answer out loud, and you're the last person to go. So you know that the correct answer is 2. And then the first person in the group says that it's 1. And then one by one, every single person in that group is saying that it's 1. Clearly incorrect. They're all Confederates, by the way. They're all acting. Clearly incorrect. And now it's your turn. What are you going to do? Are you going to go along with the group and give the clearly incorrect answer? Or are you going to stick to your guns and say that the correct answer is 2? So in the conform condition, on 11 out of 15 trials, participants were placed in a group, and actors deliberately gave the wrong response, and you were the last person to make that response. And what we find is that in the conform condition, here's what's interesting. People only conform some of the time. They don't conform all the time, just some of the time. So 63% of the time, their responses would be correct. And the remaining 36.8 trials, they gave the incorrect response. Now, I will mention that this is over all participants and all trials. But when we look at the individual data, there are massive individual differences. 25% of the participants never conformed. 75% of the participants conformed at least once.
And is that like the group that conformed at least once, is that, you know, they show one demonstration and another, like in the same?
There are 15 total, so there are 15 total sessions with each participant. And so remember that for some of these trials, they're not going to conform. I would have to look to see if they did the presentations in a random order or if they counterbalanced, but those 75%, there's going to be some variability there as well. Some people are going to do it every single time. Some people are going to do it just the once or twice.
Yeah, I just wondered, like, if you're doing it like lots of these, I wonder if, like, after a while of other people answering differently than what they thought, they just were like, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Could happen. I would want to check and take a look at that data and see if holding out for a really long period of time takes a lot of extra pressure and stress. We know that making decisions costs us a lot of cognitive resources. That's especially true when you're trying to give a correct answer when everybody else is saying the deliberately wrong thing. So why do people conform? We conform for a variety of different reasons. So we have what is called normative social influence. In general, you and I are social creatures. We are designed to exist in community, and thus we want to get approval of other people and avoid rejection. Now, let's be very clear. Rejection will not harm you at this point. Ostracism does not mean death like it did to our ancestors, but it's not very pleasant, and we want to avoid it as much as possible. On the other hand, in addition to normative social influence, we also have informational social influence. Maybe we believe that the group has information that we want, but otherwise would not get if we were not part of that group and we were not trying to conform. All right, I am going to go ahead and stop here. We'll talk a little bit more about conditions that will make us more or less likely to conform. We'll talk about obedience, and we'll finish, ideally, we're going to finish up social psychology on Friday in class. Have a great day, everybody. If you're sick, I hope you feel better. Everybody here, keep washing your hands. Sing the birthday song to yourself twice, and I will see you next time. You can also sing it out loud if you want. I'm fine.